The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Anime Thursdays on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. And we are talking mostly scary, spooky anime today on the Nerdcast Empire. We're going to talk about some shows that are either based on Halloween, scary things, spooky things, or maybe adjacent to that. That'll be kind of the topic in the second half of today's episode of the Nerdcast Empire. And of course, the first half, we'll be talking news and notes as we do each and every Thursday. Joining me in the studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Oh, it's going. Looking through the various lists of scary, spooky, horror-esque anime, you come to realize that there's very few, at least that I've encountered, that are pure horror. Like, they're always multi-genre, like, yeah, it's kind of scary at times, but it's also funny. There's drama, suspense, kind of all over the place. So when you go through the list, you look at it and you're like, does that really count? Well, yeah, I guess it does. Well, I guess that one does too. It's kind of funny. Like, very rarely you're like, that is a truly scary show. It's more like, I guess it qualifies. That works.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because they're kind of looking through this list of shows that I've watched. There were a lot of shows that I wouldn't have necessarily considered to be scary shows that probably qualify, and we're going to list them kind of at the end, where each of us kind of talk about some of the shows we've watched that we can recommend for listeners. And obviously we'll talk about a couple of different lists that have been published online that have given their suggestions and kind of what we think of their lists as we go through them, just to kind of, I don't know, critique on content, and then we'll kind of get to our list at the end of the show. We got some news items first. Nothing real heavy this week, but just some interesting news items to discuss. And we'll start with Nintendo, which obviously I think a lot of people are just kind of hanging on right now with Nintendo to wait and see when the Switch 2 is going to get announced. I feel like every big announcement that they have is finally the Switch 2. So they had another announcement, and it was not the Switch 2. It is the Nintendo Music app. You'll be able to listen to a lot of music from Nintendo games from over the years, and I'll post the story in the chat for people who want to see exactly what games you're going to get to listen to. And I mean, there's certainly nothing inherently wrong with this, and I'm sure a lot of people will be very excited about it, but it kind of seems a little weird because, again, it is very limiting to only the games that are listed there. You know, it's not like it's all video game music or anything like that. I don't know. I mean, like I said, there will be people certainly excited about it, but it is kind of a weird one from Nintendo.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. As I'm reading the story, my first thought is, kind of to your point, we're all waiting for some sort of Switch successor announcement. When is this new system going to be announced? When's it coming out? What's it look like? Anything. But while we've been waiting, instead we have gotten an alarm clock. We got some really creepy leaks from Game Freak and the Pokemon Company, which were just beyond disturbing. And now we have an app that plays first-party Nintendo video game music. So yeah, that's really cool. One thing I didn't really notice at first until looking at it now again is that I see that they have Metroid listed both for the NES and the Famicom Disk System. I think the Disk System actually had better audio, kind of enhanced audio from the NES, so that could be kind of interesting to check out the differences. But yeah, I mean, pretty limited list, but definitely some cool stuff on there. My problem is that when you listen to some of this music, it reminds you of some other game's music that you really love that just happens to not be a Nintendo game. It's like getting Apple Music and only having one record label on it.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, once you set this up, if it is popular, do you see a situation where they then go out and license music from other game developers or other system developers? Like, do you try to eventually make it more of a broad video game music channel, or does it end up folding up? Because, something that I was thinking of when I read this is maybe a year or two ago, we saw on YouTube several anime music channels that popped up that were specific to a certain publisher.
Yeah.
And I watched a lot of them, obviously, because it was a great way to sit there and listen to music. But I feel like at least a couple of those have disappeared since. either they just couldn't figure out how to monetize it, or it wasn't as popular as they were looking for. And I just kind of wonder if this is going to kind of go down that same road where it's like, seems like a really good idea, maybe really popular at first, but as it goes on and you've heard the Metroid theme 47,000 times, like, are you just, okay, let me go see what else is going on, and maybe it'll end up disappearing.
I mean, I guess the one advantage they have is that it is already tied to your Nintendo Switch Online account, so you actually already are paying for it. It's just kind of a cool new added bonus feature to the online subscription. I believe in the past, Nintendo's been pretty aggressive about taking down... There are plenty of channels on YouTube that play video game music, and I think they've been Nintendo about making sure that they get any of the channels playing their music, their first-party songs, pulled down. So at least they give you this option. I would like to see it build out more and some more options for sure, but if you are going to check it out, one song I do recommend is from the most recent Pokemon, Scarlet and Violet, the battle theme for the Team Star bosses. Song is way too good to be used on a Pokemon game. It's amazing, and people should definitely give it a listen.
Yeah, certainly some good stuff in this collection. Certainly don't want to downplay that, but again, we'll kind of see where this collection goes and how popular it ends up being. And you mentioned Nintendo being a little bit litigious and not afraid to go after their enemies, if you will. That's going to take us right into our second story this week, because this is really one of the more interesting stories that has come out of Japan. And we talk about it all the time, that Japan is certainly different as far as enforcing creators' rights and limiting fair use and things like that, which is why we try as much as we can to avoid playing a lot of anime music, and we don't show a lot of clips and stuff because you can get your channel nuked for that. But this is a different one. It says... operators behind a detailed transcription anime and movie summary website have been arrested for copyright infringement following posts for the isekai anime series Overlord. This is reported that Katakawa, in collaboration with Toho, the Japanese anti-piracy organization Coda, have led the arrest of transcription website operators who posted detailed summaries of the entire story of Anime Overlord 3 without permission from the rights holder and posted articles on the site along with related images. Coda adds this arrest marks the first of its kind in Japanese history. This from CBR.com. This is such a fascinating story, and I certainly wonder what it's going to look like when it gets to court, and how much their rights are actually going to be upheld, because I don't think in the U.S. this would ever possibly happen, because you have so much fair use. It is... as long as something is transformative and it's for criticism, like you can do a lot of stuff with things in the U.S. Japan has been much more strict on that, and this appears to be even a step further than we've ever seen them take. And I'm curious to see what happens next, because this could set a precedent that really could change the course of online content in Japan.
It kind of sounds like somebody took the disclaimer that they always give before sporting events way too seriously. It's like, that's an account of what happened in this anime. You can't do that without our permission. Sorry, we're going to take you down. I'm curious just how detailed what they posted actually was, to where it's like, you're now infringing on our copyright. Where do you draw the line there? I mean, obviously the line in Japan's going to be much more severe than anything we would see here, but it's fascinating.
It is. And I think there's already been, some hesitancy in Japan about posting even critiques of shows, because you can, or screenshots of anime, things like that, where they're worried about copyright police coming after you. This feels a little bit too far. I mean, again, it's hard for me to say that, because Japanese law may make it very clear that it's not too far, that this is completely within their rights. This is just me as someone looking in from the outside, not in Japan. Feels like this is a step too far, because again, where do you go next? Because I think it would be really hard for them to try to enforce these rights outside of Japan. They could potentially block pages from the West, like Wikipedia and stuff like that. They could just stop you from looking at the descriptions, or putting them behind spoiler tags or something that, would go. And again, like you said, the fact that they use the word transcription, like, were they like literally transcribing entire scripts of anime?
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to read an entire script, then yeah, I think that's reasonable to suggest that you are infringing on their copyright. You're recreating their work. But again, I haven't seen exactly what this entails, so I don't know how egregious it was.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to follow the story and see what happens, but if it's just kind of describing what's going on, that feels like something it should be allowed. If you are literally word for word ripping something out of a creation, then yeah, you might be kind of asking for it at that point. But yeah, really fascinating story, and curious to see what comes of this case. Whether it actually, are these people convicted, or is it thrown out, or does it get to the highest courts in Japan, and then you end up kind of trying to setting some precedent on it. So
later in the article they do reference, I want to say similar situations, but not really. As far as like Chinese sites that actually housed anime and allowed people to access it illegally. It's like I get that you can draw some parallels, but that's not the same thing.
No.
That's the difference between me downloading an MP3 of a song and you telling me what the song sounded like.
Right.
Like that is, we're in two different ballparks there, I think.
Yeah, it's, again, I think there's clearly going to be some precedent set with this quick case one way or another, and it'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that as that case progresses forward. One final story this week, and again, nothing too heavy here. This is just news from Crunchyroll that they announced on Tuesday they're going to launch on YouTube primetime channels and distribute over 40 anime on the service before the end of 2024, including Dragon Ball Daima, One Piece, Blue Lock, ReZero, and Shangri-La Frontier Season 2. To be honest, and I know you're going to say the same thing, like, I did not know what YouTube primetime channels were until I read this story, and it turns out you've already actually signed up for one without even knowing what they were called.
That's kind of the funny thing, too, is that the person who wrote the article didn't know either originally, or originally they didn't realize it either, because someone actually in the comments had to correct them, because I think originally the headline read YouTube Premium. Which is definitely not the same thing. That is just the base subscription you pay to not get ads on YouTube. This is primetime channels is something over the top that you're actually paying the channel itself for the channel.
Yeah. In fact, I included premium on my graphic because I'm pretty sure that's what the story originally said when I pulled it.
Like, by the time I got to it, they had fixed it, but I read the comments and someone actually pointed out, like, hey, and even they've updated at the bottom of the article, headline corrected, thanks. But that just goes to show you, like, how unknown this thing was, and again, it's kind of a big deal. I actually have already used the service. There was a TV show, a docuseries about 80s hair metal that I wanted to watch that was on Paramount Plus, and through YouTube, just kind of on a whim, I went ahead and subscribed to Paramount Plus, but it's right there. It's one of the primetime channels, and you can actually go on your YouTube, which I use my Fire Stick and watch YouTube primarily. There's an area for like movies and TV or something to that effect. You go there and you see, I mean, they have the NFL, MGM Plus, Max, NBA, WNBA Stars, Poker Go, all sorts of premium content that you can subscribe to and watch through YouTube. It's kind of an interesting thing. The other thing about the story I thought was funny is I had totally forgotten that Crunchyroll had their free linear channel on all the smart TV apps. So I actually went through my smart TV, my Vizio Watch Free Plus app, and accessed the Crunchyroll channel, and they were showing a bunch of episodes of Welcome to Demon School Iruma-kun. So there's that.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that, but I remember talking about that now that they had set that up. So clearly trying different routes to get stuff out. It's interesting because YouTube certainly has its own issues right now with ads, especially if you're not a YouTube Premium subscriber, which I am, but that gets more expensive all the time. But in the case of Crunchyroll, you have to think the YouTube platform is probably far better than the Crunchyroll app. So if you have to choose where you want to watch these shows, YouTube makes a lot of sense because they're certainly easier to navigate than trying to figure out where your episodes are on the Crunchyroll app.
Yeah, and I know we're kind of reaching a point where YouTube could eventually just become your cable box, where I go there first, then all my premium channels are going to be on my YouTube app. So what's the difference between that and a cable box? I could just get YouTube TV and have everything in one area, just like olden times. But yeah, I think if you can have more things in one area where you're not making people go out to the Crunchyroll app, which isn't always the most user friendly, I think that's smart for both YouTube and obviously for Crunchyroll.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, this isn't all of Crunchyroll. It is just 40 series. So this sounds like kind of a test to see like how this is going to work. And yeah, I mean, I think the more stuff you can get in one place, the better off it is, especially when you're trying to maybe set stuff up for your elderly family members who, struggle with the streaming era of the world that we are living in. And if you can make it as convenient as possible to access everything they're looking for, I think that's a big win.
But I think then the question becomes, what are you paying for it since you're not getting the full Crunchyroll experience? If you're only getting 40 shows compared to the standard Crunchyroll where you get
it's a great question.
The entire library of what they offer, I have to think it's not as expensive, right?
I would hope not.
I didn't see a price point mentioned in the article, but
kind of makes me wonder what that's going to cost.
Yeah, so, that's curious.
We'll have to look into that and maybe report back next week to see because if it's full price, that's a ripoff. And I guess you could tie it into unless it's one of those things like, hey, you're subscribing to Crunchyroll. Here you get these 40 shows, but you also get Crunchyroll on Crunchyroll.
And that's possible. I honestly don't know.
Yeah. So it's like it's not a separate service. It's just you're signing up for Crunchyroll.
I've not gone to the Paramount Plus app to see if I could just watch it through Paramount Plus. Maybe I can.
Maybe. I mean, that would make the most sense. And I think it'd be the easiest for these companies. That way they're not offering separate services. You just sign up for it. You can get it anywhere, but also on YouTube. So... but yeah, another option if you just hate the Crunchyroll app, which there are days that are...
Maybe you want to be able to leave comments on shows, and maybe through YouTube you'll be able to do that.
That's the next question that I definitely want to know. Like, can you comment on these shows? My guess is if now the answer is yes, eventually they'll figure that out and shut that off. But we'll see. But that's the news stories for this week. Nothing real heavy in the news this week, which is good. But we do just want to talk a little bit about some Halloween, spooky shows, scary shows. Obviously, today being Halloween here in the States, it's a good time to kind of talk about those things and figure we would do this kind of in two parts. I pulled a couple of lists from these websites that do this sort of thing, that create these lists. And we'll go through each one of them and we'll kind of give our thoughts on their order and what we kind of think. And then each of us kind of have a list of shows that we've watched. And some of these may be on these lists because there's going to be some overlap. But some other ones as well that we can recommend that are either directly Halloween like anime, or they could just be scary or spooky or psychological thrillers, something that's adjacent to that. We've got some in our collection that we can recommend. So the first list we're going to look at is from The Wrap. And this is, for the record, these are the first three websites that came up when I Googled this topic. So that's why they got chosen. We'll just trust the terrible Google algorithm to give us these answers. So The Wrap has 13 horror anime movies and series to watch this Halloween, from spooky to terrifying. So we'll run through the list, then we'll just kind of give thoughts on it. Number 1 is Tokyo Ghoul. Number 2, Attack on Titan. Number 3, Parasite the Maximum. Number 4, Death Note. Number 5, Demon Slayer. Number 6, Perfect Blue. Number 7, Junji Ito, Maniac, Japanese Tales of Macabre. Number 8 is Chainsaw Man. Number 9 is Hellsing. Number 10 is Case Closed. Number 11 is Elfen Lied. Number 12 is Death Parade. And number 13 is Devilman Crybaby. I obviously have heard of all those shows.
Yeah.
Just a couple that I can just mention and talk about as we go down the list. There are a couple of these shows that I want to watch. Tokyo Ghoul always looked like something that would be interesting. Obviously, everybody knows Attack on Titan. Parasite the Maximum was one that was on, I think, Adult Swim, Toonami for a minute. I think did pretty well. Death Note's obviously a classic. Perfect Blue is one that everybody talks about. Pretty... kind of, I would say gory, but definitely a psychological thriller. Junji Ito, pretty much any of his stuff, maybe with the exception of his new one. We'll talk about that a little later. Chainsaw Man, obviously really popular. Hellsing, I know you'll talk about. Case Closed is an interesting one that I would not have considered. But obviously people are dying in that show almost every episode. So it's definitely definitely can be a little bit scary at times. And I can't recommend watching all of it because even I haven't even remotely come close to watching all of it. But it's a show that I think you can drop in on for a couple of seasons and you're going to find some enjoyment in it if you're into like detective cases and things like that. Elfen Lied is an interesting one because I feel like I've seen more than one content creator who has rewatched that in recent years and really kind of made the comment that they felt like it just didn't hold up after all these years. I remember enjoying it at the time. It's very, very gory. So if you're not really into the blood and guts type horror, I would definitely recommend staying away from that one. But yeah, I'm almost curious to go back and rewatch it to see what I think about it. But on this first list, what kind of jumps out at you?
Yeah, I mean, just off the bat, I think every list mentions Tokyo Ghoul.
Yeah.
So clearly that's one that I need to get around to. Yeah, Attack on Titan, I've watched the first season, and just considering the subject matter, it may not be horror, but it's pretty terrifying what they're up against. Parasite the Maxim, I watched an episode or two. It's one I'd like to get back to at some point. Has a great open. Death Note, really enjoyed, especially the first half. It does kind of drag a bit in the second half because really the main conflict gets resolved about halfway through, and it really struggles to maintain that steam after that. It's been so long since I've watched Perfect Blue. I can't remember a whole lot about it. I know I really liked it. And it's Satoshi Kon, so I'm sure it's great.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. They mentioned Hellsing, but not Ultimate on here. I just feel like Hellsing was fine, but once you've watched Hellsing Ultimate, you don't need Hellsing anymore. Like, this is clearly the superior rendition of the story, and a masterpiece, I think. Yeah, I just kind of wonder about Elfen Lied. I've not watched it, but I wonder if that's a situation where you had a lot of fairly newer anime fans who maybe that was their first show they watched, that they're just like, oh my God, they're doing this on an animated format, like just the gore and whatnot. And maybe now that we've all become so desensitized to all of that and jaded, when you go back and rewatch it, it just doesn't have that same kind of pull over you anymore. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of the big things. I'd like to watch Death Parade at some point too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, interesting list. And like you said, a little surprised about Hellsing and not Hellsing Ultimate. That was an interesting choice.
I've always talked about how Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is better than the first Full Metal Alchemist. Take that sentiment, but just to a degree of magnitude. Like, Hellsing Ultimate is just so far and beyond better than the original Hellsing. The only thing the original one has on it is the open and ending.
Sure.
That's really about it.
So, yeah, there's something to consider as we kind of get into some of our suggestions. Another list I found, this was from last year, but obviously it still holds up, from CBR.com. This is 20 spooky anime for Halloween. We start out with Danganronpa, the animation, which I know people really like the games, so not surprised to see the anime on there. Promised Neverland, the Junji Ito collection, Death Parade, again, Madoka Magica, which is one I did not consider. We'll come back to that in a moment. Elfen Lied, Berserk, which will certainly make Chris happy. Hellsing Ultimate, there it is on this list. Devilman Crybaby again, another, which is one I would really like to watch. Kind of a psychological thriller. Devil's Line, which I'd never heard of. That's a new one. Blood Blockade Battlefront. People really seem to be high on that. Soul Eater, obviously another one that's kind of a classic. Rosario Vampire, I mean, yeah, sure. Tokyo Ghoul, Higurashi, which I'll certainly mention. Interview with Monsters Girls, Corpse Party, that's another one I'm not real familiar with. Mononoke, and then Parasite the Maximum again. And again, just a couple that I'll go through. Higurashi would definitely be on my list. It's one I really want to get back to and watch. Not only the rest of the old stuff, but also the new series that they came out with. Very much psychological thriller. Really, really good. Rosario Vampire, I guess it's Halloween adjacent, I think you could say. Like, I really kind of would put it in.
Got a vampire in it.
It's got a vampire in it. That is true. A lot of monsters in it, for example. Yeah. I would really categorize it as Halloween harem. If you're into a harem anime, you're going to... I mean, it was completely fine. I enjoyed it, but if you're looking for scary in this Halloween, I don't think that's the title you're going to go for. Which is Soul Eater, obviously. Classic. Another one on this list that I want to mention is Madoka Magica, because that is definitely a psychological thriller. That's still I still need to get back and watch the movies. The TV series of that was one of the best shows, especially at the time. Definitely kind of turned the whole Magic Girl trope on its head. But yeah, I mean, of that list, those are the ones that kind of I know something about. What we haven't talked about yet on that list, what jumps out at you?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Both these lists mention a different Junji Ito work, and I haven't really looked into either of them to know if they suffered from any kind of production issues that Uzumaki has recently. But it would be nice to know ahead of time that, hey, these are actually going to be really good representations of his works, and I'm not going to wonder why they didn't spend money on it or something if I did decide to watch either one of them. Yeah, again, Berserk is similar to Perfect Blue. I've watched it so long ago, I don't have a whole lot to say on it. I did buy the Blu-ray of it, so I need to go back and rewatch it. I'll talk more about Hellsing Ultimate later. I think there's a lot to say there. Yeah, I saw that Devil's Line on that list, and I was kind of curious about it because I hadn't heard of it either. And it was a show from spring of 2018, has a 6.83 on my anime list.
Solid.
But it does have Shota Aoi as the opening performer, so could be a pretty cool open, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blood Blockade Battlefront. I've watched a few episodes of it, and I never stick with it. There's nothing wrong with the show, and I really do want to watch it. I've never been able to, keep focused on it for an extended period of time. Soul Eater's a great show. I know people weren't super fond of the ending, but I obviously being a fan of also Fire Force, I'm kind of curious to see how those two end up connecting to each other. Yeah, I'd heard of Corpse Party, but I didn't realize it was actually legit scary. But the explanation in the article basically said it's one of the scarier, more grotesque anime that exists, evidently. So
interesting.
May have to give that one a shot. But yeah, that good list, I think.
Yeah, I think so. They did a pretty solid job. And again, there's some kind of silly ones on this list as well, but there's some variety on your Halloween list. The final list was from Collider. I've already posted in the chat. 10 perfect or anime perfect to watch on this Halloween. Number 10 is Paranoia Agent. We will talk about that a little more in a moment. Blue Exorcist is number 9. Number 8 was Another. And Jujutsu Kaisen gets number 7. From the New World from 2012 is number 6. That's not one I was familiar with. Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, number 5, kind of makes some sense as it seems to tie into a lot of the classic Japanese horror stories that you hear. Number 4, Uzumaki made the list. I wonder if that was prior to actually watching it, but we'll get to that in a moment. One Piece from 1999. I guess there are probably some certain arcs of that probably would be horror-esque. Shiki from 2010. I do remember people saying that was really scary. And then Soul Eater coming in at number 1. Uzumaki's an interesting one because obviously it's been critically panned, and I think Warner Brothers Discovery seems like they're getting the brunt of the blame. It turns out that they're ruining wrestling. Now they're going to ruin horror anime too.
Yeah, it's funny. From everything I've heard, the first episode is amazing, and then they basically they both kind of gutted the budget, and then also, I think if you look at the credits, they have so many more people working on it from then on, and they make it kind of sound like there just wasn't a cohesive vision, and you ended up with just kind of a mess.
That's a shame, really, because I think people were really, really excited for that. The other one on the list that I mentioned we come back to that I've seen is Paranoia Agent. I really enjoyed this one. It's 20 years old, which I didn't realize. It makes a lot of sense. Another Satoshi Kon masterpiece. Was interesting to see the opening theme for this pop up on a list we were watching the other day because it is such a different open. And Dream Island Obsessional Park is the English translation of the open. One that I really enjoyed at the time, and I still do. It's very different, but psychological thriller for sure. Really enjoyed that. It will definitely be on my list. We'll talk about here in a moment. But anything on this list that we haven't mentioned that jumps out at you?
Yeah, let's see. Blue Exorcist, I didn't necessarily think it was scary, but you do kind of have that demon and supernatural element there, so that's fair. Jujutsu Kaisen, kind of a similar story. it's probably a little more suspenseful than Blue Exorcist is. I've only seen the first season, but definitely worth a watch. Yeah, another one that from the New World that I've not heard of before. That article mentions it's one of the darkest anime ever, so that could be something worth looking into. Yeah, so the One Piece listing on here is for a specific arc called the Thriller Bark arc, which is, let me scroll down here farther, make sure I got that right. Yeah, so it apparently is just one specific arc of the show, and it begins on episode 337 or something like that. So not that you couldn't probably jump into One Piece given how long it is, but
it's an interesting recommendation to be like,
yeah, like you're asking that someone either just jump in, a good way into the show already, or commit to getting to that point to enjoy it. I'm sure most of the arcs of One Piece are really good, no matter what the focus is. But I thought that was a little interesting to pick that.
I would suggest that for these longer series, it'd be nice if there was a website that you could just enter the episode number, and then it would just give you a synopsis of what you needed to know before you watch it. But that would probably get you arrested in Japan.
That's a bad idea. We know that.
So don't look for that website to pop up anytime soon. It would be a good idea if you weren't going to get arrested. But
yeah, I would love a resource like that.
It would be very helpful, because sometimes these long shows, like,
I was thinking that too, because I know people complain when there are recap episodes, but when I got on the treadmill and watched the first episode of the third season of ReZero, it's a 90-minute episode. I'm sitting here thinking, like, man, if I could have had like 20 minutes of, hey, here's everything that happened up to this point, because it's been a while since you watched it and I'm sure you forgot. They do an all right job, kind of like, oh, hey, that person, yeah, but man, I still probably could have used a little help remembering everybody.
I thought that was something they did really well in the third season of Classroom of the Elite. That first episode was very much like, hey, we're moving the plot along, but here are the people you're going to need to remember who they are and what they did and why they're important to the main characters. And I feel like that's just a nice, hey, it's been a while since you watched this. Let's get you. And that's a show that has so many characters. I know ReZero is the same way.
Well, I was thinking, too, if you have a show that's based in a school, I think that's doubly important, because you just have less elements of differentiation between characters. You look at something like ReZero or a One Piece, all the character designs are so distinct, you kind of have that extra bit of, oh yeah, that was that person, I remember they look like that.
Yeah.
With something like Classroom of the Elite, it's like, well, that's that kid in the school uniform with this color hair. Which one was that again? I just...
What grade's he in?
Yeah, there's a lot less to jog your memory.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, that anytime there's been a gap between episodes, either there needs to be, a little more effort put into reminding you, or just create like an episode 0 and just be like, here is what you need to know before you watch the first episode of this third season, for anybody who might just want to jump right in.
And like Slime has done that really well. There'll be like the 0.5 episodes and that have really interesting ways of kind of having a character recap a story for you to somebody else. So it's almost like, oh, they're having a conversation and telling me everything I forgot. This is awesome.
Right. I think that's very helpful for sure. But yeah, so that's the list that they created, but we have some other suggestions, and some of them we've already mentioned. We can mention them again, but I'm going to let you go first, because there are some shows that we've watched that either we knew, like, hey, this would definitely be on the list, but I think more telling is I was going through my Anime News Network list, because unfortunately I haven't got my anime list up to date yet. There were some shows like, oh, that would probably qualify, and I really wouldn't have thought of that until I looked at this list and thought of the name of the show. But I just kind of want to get your thoughts on maybe some shows that jump out at you that either were not on this list or were on the list, but you kind of want to talk a little more about it.
Yeah, I kind of went through my list and tried to list all of the ones that I thought kind of qualified under horror or supernatural or evil or anything I could say, yeah, this might be something you'd watch on Halloween.
Yeah.
Even though it's been mentioned on the list before, it's hard to not bring up Death Note.
Yeah.
Just because, first off, it's amazing, but, you have these Shinigami that have powers. You have the main character who, by all accounts, seems like a decent enough dude, but he gets a hold of this book, and the power that it has to kill people just kind of brings out this maybe less than ideal side of him, and kind of turns him into this, well, antagonist, more or less. it's tough to not still kind of root for him at times because you feel like he at least started down the right path, like killing people that probably deserve to be killed. But obviously, that kind of power, you're not going to be able to handle it for too long. Another one, Hellsing Ultimate, that they mentioned in one of the articles. It's amazing. You know, you watch the first Hellsing, and you kind of feel, you can kind of pinpoint the moment where it's like, this isn't the manga anymore. This has to be something different. The final boss, so to speak, of the show just feels so contrived and generic, almost like they wanted to create something that wouldn't possibly infringe upon what the manga was going to do, and they succeeded in that regard.
Sure.
But Hellsing Ultimate, you continue with the actual story, and obviously you have Alucard and the Hellsing group. You have the Vatican and their Iscariot organization that kind of fights similar battle to Hellsing, but they're Catholics as opposed to Protestants, and they have ridiculous supernatural fighters too. And then obviously the big bad, the one of if not the worst villain groups in reality in this anime as a ridiculous supernatural force too. It's got so many different really cool monsters, so to speak, with different powers. It's a masterpiece. It's something I think anyone that's into any kind of shonen or older type shows, you're going to enjoy it. Another one that I'm surprised didn't make the list is Durarara.
Yeah.
Again, it's a fairly long show, not One Piece long, but it goes on a while, and there are a lot of characters, but a lot of supernatural stuff going on in the show. Between kind of some of the supernatural characters and some of the powers you see, you also have someone like Isaiah, who would be a perfect villain in a psychological horror or suspense movie. I think it's definitely one. It might take you a couple Halloweens to get through it, but it's worth a watch. Another one's Gungrave. That's from the maker of Trigun. Kind of a superhero zombie revenge story, but again, you have zombies, you have ridiculous weapons, superhuman villains who were friends of said zombie that he now has to fight. It's a really cool show. Maybe not on the level of Trigun as far as just overall enjoyment, but I think it's worth a watch. And finally, the last one I kind of want to toss out there, since they're doing individual arcs in the one article as far as the One Piece arc. Hunter x Hunter, the Chimera Ant arc of that show is definitely right up there as far as just brutal horror type watching. It's first off, the villains are essentially bugs, which is gross enough to begin with. But some of the things that they do to the characters and just random people throughout that arc is definitely horror as far as I'm concerned. So I think it definitely qualifies.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing about these long-running shows is there's probably arcs in a lot of these series that would qualify for something like that. And not surprising for a show that can get pretty dark.
Yeah.
To have a part of that show like that. Good stuff there. Good choices for sure. I thought there would maybe be some crossover because there's a couple on my list that I know we've both seen. I have some
that I didn't really expand upon that I could have listed, but I left them off.
Okay, we'll see. I imagine there may be a couple that I'll mention here. We've already talked about Paranoia Agent. It was really good. Basically the story of this little slugger that's going around attacking people, but you end up finding out that there's more going on in this town. It's definitely, again, Satoshi Kon. It's a psychological thriller for sure. Definitely worth checking out. When They Cry, Higurashi. Again, there's a lot of this out there now, so really if you just want to jump into the new series, you could probably do that. It's set in 1983, which is interesting.
Oh.
Basically, a transfer student moves into Hinamizawa, befriends some of the girls in his class, becomes a member of their club, and then you start finding out that they're involved in some club activities that are not so wholesome, involving like killing people. So, it's pretty dark, but it's a pretty interesting story. And again, there's a lot of it out there, so a lot of places you can jump in. Case closed, as I mentioned. You like mystery anime that people get killed in, that's a pretty good choice. And there's a million episodes. Madoka Magica, we already mentioned. Again, you know, the whole story of Madoka herself and obviously her friends, that they get the option to have magic powers, but then you find out there's obviously a sinister side to that as well from the little animal called Cube. Basically, they end up risking their life to fight, and it's definitely dark, very dark at times, but a really good show. I mentioned, and I didn't want to specify one series because I just want to throw it out there. Really, most of the Monogatari series would qualify. The Monogatari series is definitely an anime for anime fans. If you're not like a diehard anime fan, there are probably some themes in that show that would probably turn you off. It's just everything is pretty much taken to the extreme. But the serious episodes where you really get down to the horror are pretty scary stuff and pretty dark. So that's the stuff that I kind of enjoy out of there. There's a lot of other stuff that's, you know, of questionable taste, but it's, I mean, obviously it's a big budget series and a lot of it's really well animated. You know, an older one, Blue Gender, which is one that I have not seen in many years, where the main male character had been cryogenically frozen. He wakes up 20 years later and Earth is completely different. A race of alien bugs is taken over, called the Blue. And then humans have to basically defeat the Blue. It was a very early Funimation dub. It was one of the first series that was not Dragon Ball that Funimation dubbed. But because of that, you got a really great cast in that show. If I could scroll down here, Eric Vale, Laura Bailey. You know, it was probably a chance for a lot of them to do a little more serious acting than they did in Dragon Ball. But it's really good. And I'm curious how it would hold up all these years later, but it was good. Chaos Head. Of all the series like that, I think that's the scariest of all of them. Male character that's clearly like a shut-in. He stumbles across a gruesome murder scene, and then he ends up kind of meeting a bunch of people that seem to kind of be out to get him. It's, again, kind of dark, so kind of psychological. Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, another one that has a lot of, and then you're talking about arcs. Obviously, the Laughing Man arc is probably the scariest of that series, but really, it's all worth checking out. Just a really, really classic anime that's also a little scary. Two more. Well, actually, was it two more? I think there was one other. High School of the Dead. I threw on here. If you like zombies and you like women, fan service, you're gonna dig High School of the Dead. Actually, there was two other ones because I didn't put notes on. Ghost Stories, obviously English dub only if you can find it. But if you want to see a show that is loosely, and I do mean loosely, based on the Japanese horrors of the school, Ghost Stories tells all those. The dub tells it in a much more entertaining way than the original. But if you just absolutely want to get the dry version, you could watch the subtitle version. Two other shows, Speedgrapher, which is a little while since I've watched that one, but that was a very dark show that kind of talked, in the red light district of Roppongi and a lot of sinister things going on after dark in that part of Japan. It was a pretty good show, another kind of underrated Funimation dub for sure. And then I mentioned this, even though I'm still bitter about how it ended, but Wonder Egg Priority was definitely another psychological thriller that unfortunately, for whatever reason, didn't get a good proper ending in the anime. But up until maybe the last 3 or 4 episodes, it was really, really good. I'm hoping someday that they'll come back and reboot it and fix it, or just continue it, or do something to, finish it properly this time. But yeah, it was good as well. Anything else off of your kind of additional list that I didn't cover?
Yeah, and some of these were just because I couldn't remember a whole lot about them.
I had to look some of them up.
Long. But one is Chrono Crusade.
Oh, yes.
I mean, characters are exorcists.
Yeah, that's pretty dark.
Remember that part about it.
Yes.
Another one that I watched not all that long ago, actually, Serial Experiments Lane.
Yeah.
Definitely more on the psychological side and kind of exploiting new technology at the time and just kind of the uncertainties of what the internet really is and what it can do. I think it holds up really well just because we obviously found out later that the internet's awful. So kind of everything about that show, some of the more extreme paranormal stuff, not so much, but it holds up just for that feeling of, man, being online is terrifying.
Sure.
Another one's Soul Taker. I remember the opening being really awesome and enjoying the show more than I thought I would going into it. But yeah, those were kind of the add-ons that I threw to my list.
Yeah, really good stuff. And if you've got your favorite scary or spooky Halloween show or just a scary or spooky show in general and you want to share it with us, let us know. Drop us a line, leave a comment on the YouTube VOD, and we'd love to check it out. There's a lot of really good stuff out there. Hopefully we've given you something that you can enjoy on this Halloween, something scary or psychological to add to your anime collection. And just a few notes before we finish up, because I didn't do it at the midpoint of the show. Check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. You can listen to our previous episodes there. A reminder, as we're getting ready to sign off the air, in fact, let's go ahead and get ready to do just that as we're going to bring this episode to a close. It'll be a good time to tell you what we've got coming up. We'll be back probably Sunday. We'll let you know for sure on the social media, but tentatively, let's say 7 o'clock Eastern on Sunday will be another episode of Music Weekly. Music of October the 18th, yes. I believe, for this week. Looking forward to that. Haven't dug into that yet, but curious to see what kind of I know we do have a couple of Frontiers bands again on the list, so there's going to be some good stuff for sure. But join us tentatively 7 o'clock Eastern on Sunday. If that time changes or moves back, we'll let you know, but it'll be coming up on Sunday on the Nerdcast Empire. Next week, we'll be on for Anime Thursday. It's going to be a little later next week. Probably be 8:30, 9 o'clock Eastern time, but we will be with you for Anime Thursdays. I think we got a new video from Mike to check out. If we don't, we may by next Thursday.
We should.
That may be what we do next Thursday. The following Thursday, we will be preempted. No Thursday podcast that week because I have broadcasts like all week. But next Thursday, we'll be with you. Probably just be a little late on the Nerdcast Empire. So join us for that. A big thanks to Stoveleg Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Mike and Chris and everybody involved in the Nerdcast Empire. And a big thanks to you for checking us out. Hopefully you have a wonderful Halloween. We will see you again on Sunday for another episode of Music Weekly. And until then, for the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.